Good afternoon. We're back with another episode of Business Acceleration Playbook, where we are bringing you the plays that you need to win in your business. And today we are joined by the lovely co-hosts, Angela Buckley and Shannon, and I am excited about today's show. We're talking about branding, and I know that is a topic that gets tossed around a whole lot in the business and entrepreneur world. And I know we all have our, branding advice that we give and get. I love the topic because to me, that builds me right into. Actually, you've heard that speaking. That I do on branding, Angela, I'm pretty sure, where I talk about branding as a promise. Because to me, a lot of people think branding's the logo, the color palette and all the things, and that is an aspect, but branding is a promise. And I am excited to talk today. And I know Shannon and Angela both have a lot of valuable information that they're going to share on this topic. So let's just go ahead and jump in. Let's jump into just talking about branding in general, because I think a lot of people automatically jump to that, your brand is your logo, your brand is your palette, and that's definitely an aspect of it. And I'd say we may have different thoughts on this, which I think is going to be great. My side of it is always say that, that's a layer. That's like the sprinkles on the cake, right? It's not the cake. It's not even the icing. It's kind of the sprinkles, right? But the brand is what goes on behind it, right? It's the promise behind it. And I think that is, to me, when I think of brand, that's where my brain automatically goes. How about you all?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think of brand, I think of the goodwill. I'm coming from that legal point. I'm thinking about the goodwill, the reputation, the source identifiers, the colors, the fonts, the emotions that are evoked from a brand and associated with that brand. So similar lines of thought.
So I'm a newbie in the world of branding. I mean, even though I've been doing some sort of small business now for like 15 years, I guess, but I feel like that's not my super expertise the way it is yours, Maria. But again, I come back to your vibe attracts your tribe, and that is your brand, right? Who are you, and who are you trying to attract, and who are you resonating with? And then to your point, Shannon, the colors are reflecting your vibration and your trust and your transparency and how you're working with people. That's the brand. And everything else is visual, and hopefully you're visual, because we do all have digital footprints these days. Is your digital reflecting your real life? So I think if we talk about the branding basics, I think it's that Angela loves systems. How do you go from the back end all the way up to the front end and tie it in together? And that becomes the brand of that system. And I think we're constantly reevaluating. Today, the big hot topic in the office here has been gap. Like, what's the gap? What are we fixing? I always call that my job security. Other people call it challenges and opportunities. But right, like, that's what we need to be constantly reevaluating. Are my colors right? Is my transparency where I want it to be? Is my service, to your point, Shannon? Am I delivering what I'm promising? That's brand. Like, that whole, who are you?
Mm-hmm. And it's a brand is also a reflection of your core values of the business too, because it ties, your core values tie into your brand, because it's across the board, whether it's your service marks, your trademarks, and you're looking at the look and feel of your website, the look and feel of your business cards, things like that. They all encompass the brand. And that's where it's so important when you're developing a brand to kind of do the deep work behind it. What kind of emotions do I want to elicit from my brand? What kind of feelings do I want my clients to have, or people who are looking at my brand to feel? How do they identify what the values of my company are? They're all tied together.
Well, and I think my first company, right? I hired someone to do a great logo, and I have this beautiful logo, and I really like the colors. And actually, I like everything about the logo, except it wasn't really me, right? So it didn't even, I still like the logo, but I still don't feel like it is resonating with me. So I love it, and I love to see it, and I'm like really proud of this really nice logo, but it doesn't give me the promise and the vibe that makes me feel like Angela. And so I think there's a trick, like you learn a lot by going through all that process, but you can like it and it doesn't mean it's you.
Well, and I think, one of the reasons I think that I typically teach when I talk about brand, I typically teach from the value side of things is because I've seen a lot of companies do what you just said. They come out, they get this logo done, they get the colors because, they're coming from it from one space, and they end up later kind of changing their mind on it. And you can, overcome color changes, logo changes, graphics changes. You can overcome that, but it's really hard to overcome if you stray away from your core values and your core promise. And, there's some obviously very, very popular brands that, Disney, for example, like their logo itself, it's not anything mega, right? But it's we all know it. We look at it, and the promise behind it is that, Disney's promise is to create magic with anything and everything it does. And then, Amazon's, again, simple logo, simple color palette, but the promise behind that is to be the most customer centric, company on earth, as they say, on the planet. So, I think it's those promises is what really is the driving force behind the brand. And I've seen a lot of people struggle with the concept of, I don't know which colors to choose. Should I choose, this blue or this blue? And it's not that those aren't important, because there's lots of psychology behind colors, but also I usually caution people to not get lost in the weeds on it too long, and to really perfect the value and the promise behind the brand before they spend so much time on the front end of it, because more than likely you're going to change your mind on that. I have a lot. And most people that I've worked with also have a lot. And, I know there's lots of marketing people out there. It's like, oh my gosh, once you do it, you don't want to change. Bullcrap. Unless you're like Disney or Amazon or something, then nobody is even going to know, promise you. They're not even going to notice. So it's like, you can change your mind on that kind of stuff. You just really need to perfect the promise behind it.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And especially like when people are first developing a logo, or they're like, oh, I just need a logo, and then they're not thinking of the long term of, oh, what does that logo symbolize? Similar to what you were saying, Angela, you have this great, fantastic logo you love and everything, but then you were like, oh, wait a second, I need to go back and reevaluate. And I'm actually going through that right now because I have a new company and I'm developing the logo for that. And so I'm actually doing like, some worksheets, like, what are the core values for this new business? Who are my ideal clients? And then because of my background as an artist, I'm like looking at the color palette, like saying, okay, what do I want? Color combinations do I want to have so that, those same core values will be coming through. And it's interesting because like, playing around with fonts and everything, I'm like, oh, if I change it to this font, oh, whoa, it's really different from if I use like a sans serif font or a script font or a serif font, even with the kerning and the spacing. It makes a big difference, especially when you're playing with the white space,
Yes. And I've seen some, like go do some horror. If you want to go do some doom scrolling or doom Googling, just go look at logo fails and font fails. And this is not particularly my world, but I have some friends who are very, very into it and very, very serious about their logo and font choices. And they'll post even in LinkedIn and things. And you're just like, what was that person thinking? Like, when you're all done, put it on the wall and walk away, and then see what you see when you glance at it, when you forget about it, because what you might see might not be what you thought you were going to see. And there have been some things, not going to lie.
I've seen some too.
Sure. So
they make for great stories, right?
They do. Good blog posts. Please, I'm never on one of those blog posts. But Shannon, probably my favorite logo that I have, I drew, right? Like, again, to your point, like, and I'm not a super artist. It's for my band, so it wasn't as important, and I didn't want to spend money. We're not like, we don't make a ton of money. We just make enough money to have fun and be like, how we made some money. But it's like, it's fun, and it's only one color. It's red with a white background. Done. Simple, clean. It looks good when we print it. It's very reflective of what type of music we do, which is random anyways. And so there you go. Done, simple, and it's fun. So, you have to find what that is. Like, it's not anything I would use for business, real business.
So I know, Shannon, that you've got a background, like you said, in the art world. And, when you're, I don't even know, do you still work with people on logos? I know you used to. Do you still work with people on logos?
Now I just do my own.
Okay. Because I know you used to there for a while. You were kind of doing some of it. So, well, you still would have the concept there. Because I know we have graphic designers and stuff within the company, but I am not the graphic designer. I can, you don't want me to be, trust me. But anyway, I think that, I have an eye for it. I think a lot of people have an eye. So they know a concept of what they want a lot of times. But being able to get that through to, the artist, sometimes that can be a challenge. But, I know, what would you recommend if somebody is getting ready to maybe rebrand or start their brand? So maybe they started their business and they never did really completely make a brand. Because I see that a lot. They may have gone on Canva and thrown something up just as a placeholder, which is not necessarily wrong. I've done that with new things too. But, they're ready to go ahead and take a step forward and, design a color palette, design a brand guide, design of those things. What is the best starting point that you would give them?
I guess it would be the whole of taking a deeper look at your business, the core values, the ideal clients, and start from there. Because when you have that in mind, then you can say, okay, now we can move forward. Okay, so I'll take my law firm, for example. One of our core values is creativity and innovation. So when I was designing the color palette for my ideal clients who are high vibe, visionary entrepreneurs, they're super creative. So they're going to respond to brighter colors. And so I said, okay, well, if I'm thinking about brighter colors and I'm also thinking about my core values for my business, they're going to be things along the line of fuchsia and purple and orange, and they're fun colors. And then I was playing around with the white space. And so I found some neat fonts over and over and over and over and over until I found the right font that I felt would elicit that serious, yes, I'm a lawyer, I'm serious, but at the same time, I'm very creative and I'm fun and I'm not your typical lawyer. So if you go to my website, it's purple and pink and white and orange, and the fonts are fun and playful and creative. So I was thinking, I want my clients to know that I am serious. I'm a lawyer because I have all this education, all this knowledge, but B, I'm relatable. I am creative. So that is, and I live in the IP world. That's where I'm an intellectual property lawyer. So my ideal clients are coming to me for all these reasons. But it went back to my core values. And it took me a while to actually write down, different types of values. I did this whole it was an exercise that I did where I took the names of all these core values, and I had them all in these little index cards, and I put them into 3 piles. Like, this is who really important to me, not so important, and then not important at all. And then I would break them down and break them down and break them down until I had 5 key values that I had. And then I would create statements using those values. And then once I came up with that, then the same thing I did with my ideal clients. I took like the avatars of, like we were talking about last week, I took the avatars of the clients that I really want to work with or who are already my clients. And I took all of their little, like the aspects of them. And I said, okay, what would they respond to? What are their problems? Why are they coming to me? What would happen as a result of not working with me? What would happen to them if they did work with me? And then from there, I know it's a lot of deep work, but that's how I came up with the fonts and the colors and the palette and the look and feel, the aesthetic of my brand because I did this deeper work.
And I think that's where a lot of people, they try to skip that step. And, and it's easy to do. You're starting a new business or a new campaign or whatever the case may be, and you have this idea on what you want it to look like. But if you don't take the time, like you said, to do the deep work, you can be on the wrong road, on the wrong road. And it's so easy to do because, if I sit and if you ask me, Marie, what do you like? What do you like? I like lots of different things, and they're all in different worlds, right? And, sometimes if we're not careful, we'll pick something based on something we like, just because we like it. And we haven't, much to your point, taken the time to say, okay, well, my target audience is this, and this is how they're going to connect. And, the reason behind this brand and this business is this. And, it all has to connect because, just doing it because you like it, that doesn't have the longevity in it. And I mean, I've done it because it's like, oh, that's pretty. I really love that. Oh my gosh, I love that. We can get by with that in our wardrobe, right? I dress all kinds of different ways because I have all kinds of different tastes. But it's really hard to do that with your business if it doesn't align with your target audience and what you have to offer. And I think, that's a big thing that I see, even with somebody coming to me, and they'll say, oh, we want to do this new website, or we want to, do this marketing campaign, this email push, this funnel, whatever. And we usually have to look back to see what they have, and it's all over the place. And, and I'm honest with them when I'm saying, I'm like, it's easy to do. I know better, and I still do it because it's so easy to do. You don't even realize it until you're like 10 steps ahead, and you're like, wait, I should have probably back there. And so when I'm talking to people, it's not that I'm calling them out. I'm honest with them. I'm like, listen, I was like, I do the same thing. I know better, and I still find myself doing it until I'm like several steps ahead. But, it's easier if you're just starting out to go ahead and think about it, really think about why, you're offering the product or service that you have. Like, that is huge. Why? And then what you have to offer, and then how you're going to be offering it, because all of those, really goes into creating the value of your brand, the value of your company, the value that you have of what you're going to be offering to your target audience. And that's going to really start you on the right path to getting where you should be.
I agree. Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Angela?
One of the thoughts that I had was that as business coaches and consultants, sometimes we need to go back and read our own work, right? Like, there have been times where I'm like, I literally wrote about this last week and I should be taking my own advice. It's hard. It's hard to take your own advice sometimes. That's why we need a community to help us along, and a coach, and events like this, right? Like, we come together every Tuesday and we talk through things. But to Maria's point, there are plenty of times where you're like, I knew I was supposed to do that. I did. But I was caught up in the moment, and maybe I didn't have it mapped in my charter quite, explicitly, this is the next thing. So it's good to have friends to call you out once in a while and say, but did you do this yet? Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and there's the other side of the spectrum too, because I usually tend to be on one side or the other. Like, I very rarely on my own, with my own stuff, I'm on the middle. Like, I'm a middle ground, just enough thought into it, and but just enough not overthinking it to where I'm coming on this perfect path. I very rarely am able to do that for myself. Somehow with clients, I can see it so clear. It's just like it like beams into my brain. But on my own stuff, I get lost on one side or the other all the time. And this was just recently. I posted something about it. I was just caught up in this one campaign I'm working on, and I was like, why I draw it on my boards, right? I'm constantly drawing it, and I couldn't figure out the way that it should connect. And then all of a sudden it was like a light bulb. Now, granted, I've been working on this for weeks, trying to figure out why, I couldn't get it the way I wanted before we were ready to push it out. And then it hit me. I was like, all right, let me ask myself the questions like I would a client. And I was so overcomplicated. I was so far lost in the weeds. I was beyond the weeds. And I was like out in the swamps or wherever. I was so far out in the weeds that I completely, stepped away from the whole purpose. I was doing it anyway, really. And I was just way over here doing something else. And once I got myself back on track, I had it done less than an hour. And, and I think there's both sides to that, I also have been with people that, worked with people that they're working on their brand. They've been working on their brand for like years. This has been this like evolving brand for years, but they've never committed because they don't want to, quote unquote, and I'm quoting them here, limit themselves on who they're wanting to reach, right? And so that's a whole other thing. But it's I've seen it on both ways, right? That you just go ahead and pick something. Yes, put the thought into it, but go ahead and roll with something. Don't spend months, years working on this evolving logo, brand, palette, font, all that kind of stuff. All those things are very, very important. It's not that they're not, but working on that for the person that I'm referencing, and if he sees it, that's fine. He I'm not mentioning names, and he laughs about it now. He literally worked on that for years, and it was almost 3 years, like 2 years and something. It was like this evolving logo and palette, and he had all these options on it, but he had never committed to one.
Fail forward.
Yeah, it was kind of like, and I was like, just pick one. And he was like, but what if? I don't care. Pick one.
How are his clients reacting to that? Because when you're think about it. If you're constantly in flux like that, the clients are going to be looking at that going, well, if you can't commit to a logo or you can't commit to this, are you going to commit to me?
And I think that's a good point. And there was parts of his business that were super on point. Very, very, very intellectual man, very smart man, did very good work. Now his income that was coming in was this much of what it could be. And I think that was his hang up, right? That was his hang up, is because he was so lost, again, use the term again, lost in the weeds on, I don't know which one to choose, this one or this one or this one or this one. And he had 5 options that he was just like all over the place on. And I was like, pick one. Just pick one. Because, none of them were like, oh my gosh, this is it, that, all of them can be, but they were all good, right? They were all good. They were all decent. Just pick one. And, that kind of stuff comes to me naturally, typically. Like, I'm just like, all right, just pick it. But for some people, they get caught up in that so heavily. And I have found myself there in moments, and it's, outside of my normal character, but I can understand how that could be super overwhelming, right? To not know which one to choose. But I think, much to Angela's point, it's important to have people to fall back on, right? These people will call them masterminds or friends or business partners or whatever. But people to say, all right, I'm lost in the weeds on this. I need somebody to kind of get me out of my head. I'm overthinking this, because whether it's your natural nature or not to overthink things, we all have the moments that we do. And I always, I have a Post-it note in my office that says done is more profitable than perfect. That's what it says. It's on the wall. Done is more profitable than perfect. And the reason is because my things that I do tend to get lost in the weeds on naturally, I look at that and I'm like, all right, so am I going to make more money by sitting and staring at this for another, day, week, month, year? No. So, let's go ahead and make a decision on it and move forward. And again, that's not to say that there shouldn't be some level of thought put into it, but, sitting on it so long that, that's just as detrimental as, not thinking about it at all.
Yeah.
Again, fail forward. Like when in the business world, we talk about your cash turnover. It's more profitable to turn your cash over, right? Money in, money out, with a lower return on investment, but turn it over more frequently than to go for those big wins. It's also more sustainable, because if you miss it on a turn, you miss a little bit, but maybe you can pick it up the next time. So you're more agile, you're more flexible. It sounds like you're talking about a sport, but really you're talking about how you're responding to your customers quickly. If you're only pinning your hopes on one big project, you're in trouble when that project is over. You need many smaller streams that are helping you give that constant feedback, that constant continuation of improvement, right? Continuous improvement loop. Mm-hmm. So fail forward fast.
Yeah. And another thing, like when you're building up your logo and your brand identity, of course, you're going to think about your trademarks, your service marks, and whether or not you're going to be using it in a specific geographic area, or you're going to be using it more in a broader sense. Are you going to be using it throughout the US? Or you're going to be using it internationally? And how are you going to be using it with what goods and services? And of course, before you even start with the brand, do a search, see who else is using those marks, because I've had too many people who have said, oh, I created this great name for my company and I registered it, and there were no other companies in Ohio that had this registered name. And then I started putting it out there, and I got the URL and everything, and then I got a cease and desist letter. I'm like, well, what did you do when you initially started? Oh, well, I just searched the Secretary of State website. And I'm like, okay, let's back up.
It's step one.
Let's back up and like start over. So if you could go boop, 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 rewind and be like, oh, I'm going to start a business, or I'm going to start a course, or I'm going to name something and start using it as a mark. Let's just do a quick search on Google, a quick search of the USPTO database, and see if anybody else is using it.
Which I think obviously this is coming from an attorney. A lot of business owners, when you start, you're just like, oh, I got this great idea. And I'm that person, right? And I know I've had conversations with Shannon too. And that's the question she asked me. What did you do the search? I did in Ohio. I did in Ohio.
I did it on GoDaddy. If it's available on GoDaddy, it's available.
So, I mean, again, that's the reason you have
the
people
US
in
government
your corner,
says.
right? That know these things that you don't know. Because it makes sense. When she said that, I was like, oh, that probably would have been a good idea to do. But, I say this all the time, pretty much almost every show, that, you get into business because of one or two things you do amazingly. And it does not mean that you do all the things amazingly. And that's the reason you have to have these people that you trust to walk you through the things that, you may be barely proficient at, or you may completely stink at. Those are not my things, right? So I think it's important. I mean, and I'm saying that only that if somebody's listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't do that. It's typically not going to be worst case scenario. I guess it could be, but it's typically not. But I do, if I had to go back, because a light bulb in my head when she said, I was like, oh, that would have been a really good idea to do that. I would have gone back and done the whole full search. But so it's not too late. If you can call Shannon and she can help walk you through all the legalities. Don't call me because I don't know. I'll just send you to her. So.
But yeah, this is just some best business practice advice, for all the entrepreneurs who are out there listening to our show. We're going to be giving you some little tidbits here and there, so that, because once you know, because if, say, for example, you want to branch out into other goods and services too, that's a good thing to know. Like, okay, if I'm here in my little corner doing this, and I have this name, but now I want to branch out. Well, right before I branch out into these other goods and services, let me just take a quick peek and see if anybody else is out there doing the same thing, or that it's more of a proactive way to ascertain whether or not you should be not expanding your business, but using the marks themselves as source identifiers.
Absolutely.
So even courses should be checking for names and everything as well, because there's a lot of course creators.
Yeah, it just depends. I always say, go ahead and do a search. See what kind of course there is that's out there that is teaching XYZ. What names are out there? Is it confusingly similar to my name? How can I create something that's going to, because of course, when you're starting something, you're like, oh, I want this to be, like a signature course, or this is something that I want to have for a long time, because you're looking at longevity. And I want this to be associated with me and my brand as part of my brand identity and my IP portfolio. So it's just best to just go ahead and do a search, especially for courses, because there's all different kinds of names. And it's interesting because, Maria, like all you marketing people love, names that are great with keywords, and then you run into the problem with all us trademark attorneys, because we're like, oh, well, those are too descriptive, because on the spectrum, we're like, oh, the strength of this mark, it's not very strong because it is descriptive. And it might be difficult to get through registration. In addition, there might be like a ton of other people out there using the same thing.
Do people care though, as long as they're not selling the same thing? Like, is there a time when it matters and a time when it doesn't matter?
Again, like it depends on the person's situation.
Right.
You know, like you could be developing something that is just for internal use that's not going to be used elsewhere. And then there could be something, another person that's like, okay, I'm going to develop this and I'm going to be putting it out to the world. And then they do a search and they see somebody else is using that same mark. And then the bell rings in their heads, like, is this worth the headache? Is it? And then maybe it's time to consult an attorney for this.
Gotcha.
No, well, and I think that for, you mentioned course creators, Angela, and I know, lots of us that create courses, we have all the names, right? All the names, and much to Shannon's point, a lot of them are very markety, So I think that's a good question. Like, how would you recommend maybe going about that? If somebody's branding, let's say they're branding a business and they've got their logo, their fonts, their, palette and everything for the business itself, but they're going within the business and developing these course curriculums and, all the things, right? Would they need to, I guess, trademark their brand name and all the courses under it? How would that typically work?
So like it depends on the person's situation. So if they're going to be because the trademarks are all about identifying the source. If they're going to be using your course as a source identifier of that person and that brand, not that person, that business, or that person or that brand, that's when you need to start considering, oh, well, should I be getting federal registration for this? Like I said, it always depends on the situation. But then when you're also talking about courses, you're going to be talking about copyrights too, and protecting that work, that copyrighted material with registration with the Copyright Office. Because then also you're looking at, you need to strategize whether or not. It's so
hard to defend that though, Shannon, that a lot of course creators are just like, we're not going to bother because we know we don't feel that we have the strength to defend, right? Like, in order for everything that you just say to be true, and it's true, you still have to defend it. And if you don't have the wherewithal to defend, then what's the bother? What's the point in getting the marks?
It like I said, it just depends on the situation. It depends on what you want to do and the value that you have for your IP. So I can't really give any advice.
No, I understand.
I know.
I don't want to take a particular situation, but I totally agree with you about the defense. When I was an artist, I worked for a record label and I created all this cool stuff and everything. And there were people ripping off our stuff all the time because we had famous artists and musicians, and they were like, we'll just use this as a way to, for our fans to use. They're ripping off our stuff, but any publicity is good. But I understand that.
I mean, so that's where exactly, and that's where many of the business colleagues that we have these conversations of pick and choose what makes sense. Like, I would like to make sure that my overall website, etc., is copywritten, whatever. But the material that's inside my coursework, I do academic sites and I do some research of my own, and then I don't expect that to be copywritten, and I ask people to cite it. Like, if they take it from me, I don't think I have the wherewithal to defend it. Or I would rather, frankly, I'd rather be positive, right? Like, I would rather go forward and create new stuff that they can't, and I'm going to just take this as a positive perspective and say, imitation is the highest form of flattery. And to your point, any marketing is better than no marketing. So if they're going to use it, hopefully it floats back towards my general direction, because I have the vibe and the creativity to do it, and they clearly don't, because they stole it.
Yeah. And that's unfortunately the conundrum that many creators face, is that I've created something and I want to create, but I mean, a better strategy too, like, is if I'm talking about the overall course. So like, you've got your course materials, you've got your worksheets, you've got your videos, you've got all of that stuff. Just, that could be one thing that you have registered, because if that's the one thing that you are really wanting to protect, then, it's a good idea to do that. But again, always consult with somebody, for your particular situation.
Yep. You're
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah, I think it's good. And I mean, like you said earlier, proactive is always better. Just go talk to somebody, because, most of the time they'll tell you, you don't need this, or, yeah, it might be a good idea to do this, type of thing. And, if you're not an attorney and you're not that specializes in this kind of thing, I think it's important to seek one out, because, again, back to if you're not in that business, you start your business for something else that you're good at, and it's not that. So don't try to be your own attorney or bookkeeper, or I can make a list of the things you don't want to be. So I think that's very important. I think it ties right into the entire conversation on just talking about your brand, right? If you're developing this brand, this business, this thing, you need to hyper focus on that. And if you're kind of lost on trying to, juggle all the balls, something's going to give. And, I know it's hard when you first start out with a new business. You are wearing all the hats, but there's a few hats you need to get rid of right away. And that's, we talk about this all the time. The legal, the bookkeeping. Yeah, yep. You have to. You are money ahead. Money ahead.
So brand basics. We said logo. We said values. You said brand promise. I really like that. We've talked about transparency. I think the other thing that we haven't spoken about quite as much is really the gap. And we've also talked about your customer avatar last week, but the gap, like, where does that all tie in of what's the pain point that you're trying to solve? And I think that's part of the avatar understanding and part of the promise, right? Where do we go with that? And what else are we missing when we talk about branding basics?
Obviously,
and I have to step off screen because this computer is being difficult for a second. I'll be right back.
You're fine. No, you're fine. We are talking about, the problems that they have. You're going to be dealing with that when you're creating your avatar, when you're creating your business, ideally, because when we start a business, we're trying to solve a pain point. We're trying to offer a solution to something anyway. And so I think if we have done the work ahead of time on coming up with, why are we getting into this business? What are we creating? How are we creating it? Who are we serving? We will have a great idea on those pain points that we're trying to solve. And that should go right into, I do consider that kind of part of the brand promise, right? I group that all into kind of one thing. But what do you say about that, Shannon?
Well, when I'm looking at, a brand, I'm looking at, like I said, the core values, the look and feel, the aesthetic, the emotions, I'll take, let's look at Disney again, right? So they're magic, right? Just even the way that they have the star as the dot for the eye, what is that eliciting? But then, when you're also looking at Disney's brand, you're looking at all the things that they have, that create that sense of wonder and excitement and creativity. And when I'm thinking of Disney, I was just like, oh, okay, Disney movies, Disney parks. I grew up in Florida, so I was always going to Magic Kingdom and the parks themselves. And just walking through the park, you feel that sense of excitement. And, but also, like, I know if I get something from Disney, it's going to be something that is very thoughtful, innovative, creative, fun. These are all what I'm thinking of, like, the values that are elicited through that brand.
They have job codes that no one else has, right? Like,
yes,
you're an Imagineer.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I know.
Perfect.
I know. So, like, that's where, like, that whole like, why I stress so much about the core values, because I didn't even realize that until I was working on my own brand. Really, like what do I want my clients to feel that I represent, that is different from all the other lawyers out there. I mean, you're not going to find, I was looking at so many law firm websites and I was like, oh my God, it's like a bunch of people in suits with books behind them. That's not what I want to elicit to my clients. If I'm talking about strategy and innovation, and then me sitting there in a suit with books behind me, that's more of, I'm traditional, strength, knowledge, intelligence. And I'm not saying that I'm not intelligent, but I'm intelligent in a different way. Like
Absolutely.
Disney is intelligent in a different way. Like they're all about imagination and creativity. So innovation comes from imagination and creativity.
Absolutely. Well, and let me ask you this, because I think I already know the answer to this, but I think this is important to kind of point out, because I think we all end up doing this accidentally. When you first became an attorney, did you feel like you had to kind of fit in that box though?
Oh
well, now I'm an attorney. I got to put on a suit. I got to put my butts behind me. I got to be professional Shannon, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, and I figured that, because it was the same way. Like, I remember I got my first like big girl marketing job for another company, and I had to be like this professional. And I mean, you might know me personally. Like, I can be professional, but I am a goofy person. And I thought I had to like shove that person like away, that she had to go somewhere else because I was a grown up now. I was professional, right? And even whenever I left that company and started my own business, it didn't make it better. It actually made it worse, because then I had all the pressure of trying to get clients too. So I had to be like uber professional, and it was exhausting and it was tiring. And I felt like I completely lost the side of myself that was really deeply me. And, much to your point, I have the side of me that is professional. I can walk into a board meeting and be super professional and do what needs to be done, right? But I also am fun and crazy and say goofy things, and I'm creative. And I have this other side of me that, a lot of times society says don't go together in the professional business owner, world. But who says, right? So like Angela's saying, Disney created its own, Imagineer, right? That didn't exist before that. And, there's nothing that says that you cannot create, a business, a job title, whatever that encompasses all the things that are you. And honestly, I think if we all did more of that, I think we would be happier as a society, because, these stereotypical boxes that we feel like we have to fit into is exhausting. It's actually damaging. And, I really feel that when you're thinking about your brand, you really need to think about who are you? I think, much to what you were saying, Shannon, who am I? Like, who am I? Who's my client? What do I do? And how do I kind of mix all that together to where it's able to showcase all these aspects? And, and then you will reach your person. You'll reach your ideal person. There may be people that don't like your ideal, who you are, all of the versions of you, right? And that's okay. And that's a hard one. It really is. When I first kind of I always say pulled off my mask of perfection. When I pulled off my mask of perfection, it was like, here I am, warts and all. There's some people that don't like me. Either they just don't. They want the glossed over mask on version, and that's fine. Because there's people out there that is their natural, personality, and that's completely fine. So when you're coming up with kind of your brand promise, and all the things that encompasses what your company is, and who you are and who you're serving, you really do need to tap into those kind of those deep, dark parts of you that says, okay, well, what would make me happy forever, right? What is going to be something that it doesn't seem like a job, right? It doesn't seem like a job because it's me. It encompasses all the layers that are me. So, I mean, I think that is so important to do. I get super passionate about this, as you can tell. It's like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love how you express that, because that's about taking it all out, because I actually just did that. Like, I turned off, I went through a rebrand with my law firm, and I took off. I said, you know what? I am no longer going to be who I am not. I am not just a lawyer. I'm an artist. I'm a holistic practitioner. And I'm going to merge all of these and start being authentically myself. And when I started being authentically myself, it was so freeing, because then I could take a look at my brand for my business and be like, all right, what does my law firm represent? Who are my ideal clients? And I just speak directly to my ideal clients. I'm like, I know who I want to reach. I know their characteristics, all kinds of, who they are, right? With their different avatars. And I'm not speaking to anybody else. If you want XYZ lawyer, then, and I'm not that, then you're going to move on anyway. I am speaking to my clients. And when you're coming up with your brand and you're doing that deep work and you're looking at, overall, what does this company represent? When you are very clear on those values and what you want to represent, who your ideal client is, then it's so much easier to come up with your messaging for your brand, your strategy for the brand, as well as then going into colors and fonts. And you can clearly communicate this with your designer. Because when I was designing logos, 22 years ago, it was a whole other ballgame when I would work with somebody who would give me clear direction versus someone who was like, oh, just make it look pretty. Because then as a designer, we're like, okay, what can I come up with that elicits what my client, who's the person who's the brand I'm developing, wants for their brand. And that I'm going to stress this over and over and again, that being clear with your values and doing that deep work will also build a brand that has longevity, because there's meat behind it and people can feel that. Your clients can feel that, your colleagues can feel that. I mean, just from even the response that I've gotten from colleagues and friends and clients for my new branding, they're like, I love this. I love your website. I love your logo. I love everything, because it's more you and it's more of what your law firm represents. And I was like, thank you. Thank you. And you can tell that I did all this deep work, so that's my advice is doing that deeper work, taking the time, whether it's like, a few days or a few weeks, taking that time and getting that clarity will help you develop a stronger brand. And it also gives you time to get feedback from people, so that when you do go to the designer, you're like, okay, this is what my brand represents. These are the people who I want to reach. Let's come up with a color palette and some fonts to play around. And then your designer should be able to come back with, several different versions of a logo or, a color scheme for you.
Right.
Well, and I know, like, longevity obviously is the goal. If you're starting a business, most of us don't want to start a business that we have for a year, right? We want it to be like forever. So longevity is the goal. And, also I do want to say that don't get, I guess, frustrated if you start to try to do this deep work and maybe you're not ready because you don't really know, right? Mm-hmm. Like, 'cause I mean, it's a process. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, I feel like I refine my branding, I refine my business, I refine myself, right? We're always doing personal, or we should be always doing personal development, right? So as we do these things, we kind of tighten up and, really refine some of the things that maybe don't fit. Like, it seems like, well, I think this might fit. I might be able to shove it in here, right? But then it's almost like decluttering your house. I love to declutter my house. There's like it's almost time, like when the sun starts being out and being shiny, my kids know it's getting ready to be like spring cleaning is like an Olympic sport in our house. I absolutely love it. I love to go through and freshen up everything. And you should really do that in your business. And, and I started really doing that myself within my business. And it's funny that it never even occurred to me until, this year when I was mentioning it to a client. They're like, why don't you show me how to do that? And I don't even know why it never came to my mind that a lot of people don't do that, but you should. Spring clean your business, right? So look at what you're doing right now. What doesn't fit? What needs to be, go somewhere else, right? Just like the pants that you've had since, freshman year of college that maybe you're hanging on to, because just in case, right? Go ahead and get rid of them. And we have those things within our business too I actually had a client tell me this. He was like, well, I don't want to get rid of that because I paid for that. And I'm like, I realize that, but it has nothing to do with anything that's going on in your business right now. So if you want to keep it for sentimental reasons, like tuck it away in a drive on Google, whatever, but we're not using it, right? So if a lot of us have those things because we've spent time on them or money on them or both that we think we need to hang on to, but it doesn't really fit anymore. So like, I just wanted to say that just because I think it's important that as we're talking about these deep dives and these things that we make it sound easy now, but it's not always easy. It takes time to really think, okay, well, why doesn't this feel good? Maybe you're doing this section of your business and you're just like, every time you get ready, you're like, ugh, it just doesn't feel right. Doesn't feel good. Well, that may be something you need to do a little bit more deep dive on and say, why do I feel like that? Right? What's making me feel like that? And, do the personal development to try to figure these things out. Do your homework, do your spring cleaning, right? I think it's important to talk about because, logos and colors and all the fun part of branding, but, dialing into the deep parts of the brand is you, right? You are your brand. And even when you step out of your company, you've left an imprint on some level within that company, within that industry. So you really need to think about, doing that deep dive in your own life, in your own, heart, in your own mind to figure out, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, what do you resonate with, what's going to really elicit the emotions to be able to connect you with your ideal client. Because that's the whole point of branding anyways. It's that connection, right?
Yeah.
Well, so it's important. We've talked about this before, that cycle of innovation, right, from the Duke Center of Excellence, and how you're looking out and you're looking in and you look out and you look in and you continually get that external feedback, but then also look internally of what part of that fits and what fits. And what we've just done in this last hour is come right back to what are your values? And then you just added on the next layer. I know what my core values don't typically change. Like they might, modify a little bit over the years, and maybe you've learned a little bit, and so you've shifted what's most important. But in general, they stay pretty close to who you are and who you were. However, you can adjust what that looks like to the world based on what the world is perceiving, right? Like, I'm trying to think of a good example, but for example, I guess I do all my sports things. It's on the side, but the world sees my sporting activities a little bit differently the second you put Team USA behind it. But I'm still getting up in the morning and working out because I want to get up and I want to work out and I enjoy it. The world sees it a little bit differently, but my core value is still stayed the same. But do I want to adjust how I share that with the world? Because maybe it's an element that actually helps bridge a gap in my business, but the core is still the same. So you can really talk about internal and external, still maintaining those values, but actually going through it and sometimes just rewording them in a way that is actually beneficial to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what you just said is exactly how a company should be doing with their branding. The company's core values, may change slightly because they learn more, right? It's exactly the same thing. And I think that is, where I see some companies accidentally go astray is because, they forget the core values. I had a client semi-recently that was an issue, and it was so hard. I wanted to grab his face and say, why did you start? Because why you started, that meant everything. And that's the reason your business just bloomed like a flower. Right. And it did. But somehow along the way, accidentally, because in his mind and heart, I know his core values did not change, but we get accidentally sometimes caught up in the day-to-days, right? These things that take our attention. And, I think that's why it's so important to be, very proactive at consistently looking at your calendar, looking at what you're spending your time on. And we've talked about that before, and we will again. But I think it's important to do those things because you can accidentally end up way, way, way off, why you started and where you started. And sometimes we can figure it out when so much damage has been done that it's so hard to repair. And I think that, to me, that's the reason when we first opened, I was like, it's the brand promise. The reason I say that's the most important to me is because that's where I see people lose it all. It's not because somebody's like, I hate that logo. It's because they accidentally forgot why they started and the reason that, they spent ungodly amount of hours and money getting their business started. They forgot that. and somehow ended off way off track. And by the time they realized it, they were so far off. It was so hard to get back. So, I wanted to just kind of, because I do think that the fonts are pretty and all of it's, important. But the reason that I like saying that it's the brand promise is just for that reason, because that's what I've seen completely destroy, companies. So I feel like we need to end with something a little more pleasant than that. So that's kind of like
no.
Downers need to say something.
No Debbie Downers here. So really make sure that your logo is transparent. Make sure that your brand promise is in line with your brand values. If you want to talk about fonts and all the legal stuff, call Shannon because she knows it all. And I think that's the important part. Like your vibe is really your brand. Putting it up, and everything else is just a reflection of that.
Absolutely. Well, I always enjoy our talks. It's always great.
And I love Tuesdays at 1:00. It's my favorite.
Oh, me too. I usually kind of walk out of here like, it's great talking with, as they say, like-minded people. So, and I think it's so refreshing to have conversations to where, we can talk about these things that are so important within our businesses and other people's businesses. And we did have a couple of people that kind of commented, and I just wanted to give a shout out to the unknown 1920. So hi. And then Jeff. Love Jeff. If you don't know Jeff, he is amazing. And there's Will too. So give a shout out to these people. Wise. Will's also known as Wise. He's got a podcast. Jeff has a podcast as well. So there's some podcasters. But we will be back again next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for another episode. And thank you all. And
thanks for joining us, Shannon.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah,
it's always so great. So we will see you all next week. If you're watching this on replay, if you could do us a favor and just #replay. We're trying to keep track on all the replays. That would be fabulous. And make sure you like us, share us, and go to our Facebook page, Business Acceleration Playbook, and you can also like us there. So I appreciate it and see you all next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.